A photograph, grainy and blurred, dated September 1943. A cluster of Japanese infantrymen frozen mid-charge, faces twisted in fury. Yet behind them, scattered on the ground, lie spent 81mm mortar shells. A broken radio intercept crackles with static, fragments of a message. Enemy. Ineffective. Laughable. The Japanese soldiers mocked the American 81mm mortars, dismissing them as toys. How was it possible that a weapon so lightly regarded would soon carve a deadly path through waves of banzai attackers? What secret lay buried beneath this derision, waiting to rewrite the brutal calculus of the Pacific battles? By mid-1943, the war in the Pacific had reached a fever pitch. The U.S. Army sought to equip its infantry with a versatile indirect fire weapon, the 81mm mortar. Designed for portability and rapid deployment, it was intended to suppress entrenched enemies and disrupt massed charges. Meanwhile, Japanese commanders scoffed at the weapon's modest caliber, far smaller than their own 150mm artillery, and doubted its lethality. A faded blueprint found in a U.S. Ordnance archive shows the simplicity of the mortar's design: a smoothbore tube, a base plate, and a bipod. The engineer's notes highlight its ease of use and rapid rate of fire, but concede limited range and shell power. Why did the Japanese leadership so quickly underestimate the potential of this seemingly fragile weapon? Was this a fatal miscalculation or a deliberate gamble? The 81mm mortar fired a 6-pound shell at a velocity of roughly 250 meters per second, with a maximum range near 3,000 meters. Its high-angle trajectory allowed it to strike behind cover, and its rate of fire, up to 20 rounds per minute, enabled sustained bombardment. Yet, its relatively small explosive charge led many Japanese officers to dismiss it as ineffective. The mortar's simplicity belied its tactical flexibility. It could be broken down and carried by a few men, deployed within minutes, and aimed to saturate enemy positions. A surviving U.S. mortar crew manual, stained with mud and blood, details rapid adjustments to elevation and deflection under combat stress. How did such a modest weapon become a silent killer that shattered the infamous banzai charges? Were its limitations a mere illusion masking a devastating reality? The first major encounter came in late 1943 during the battle for Tarawa Atoll. The 2nd Marine Division, equipped with 81mm mortars, faced repeated banzai assaults, frantic, desperate, waves of Japanese infantry surging across open terrain. Initial American reports noted the mortar's shells producing only light damage and scarcely slowing the attackers. But as the battle wore on, mortar teams refined their techniques, coordinating fire to create lethal patterns. A tactical map recovered from a Marine battalion's war diary shows overlapping mortar impact zones, cutting off Japanese routes of advance. The Japanese soldiers' laughter turned to silence, then horror. What did the U.S. commanders see that the Japanese had missed? How did this deadly learning curve unfold in real time? Japanese forces, initially dismissive, soon recognized the devastating impact of the 81mm mortars. Field reports and captured manuals reveal a shift in tactics. Banzai attacks became less frequent, replaced by infiltrations and night raids. Instructions circulated among Japanese units urged caution, advising troops to avoid open charges and seek cover. Some accounts mention attempts to capture or disable American mortar positions, but these were rare and costly. A weathered leaflet found near Saipan reads, "Beware the hidden thunder from American tubes." Yet, despite these adaptations, the mortar's presence continued to shape the battlefield. Could this tactical shift have been prevented? Why did it take repeated losses before the Japanese command truly grasped the mortar's threat? The turning point came in early 1944 during the Battle of Saipan. American mortar teams, bolstered by increased ammunition and improved coordination with infantry, unleashed with devastating effect. Japanese banzai charges, once a hallmark of their desperation, were decimated before reaching American lines. A combat report highlights a single mortar platoon firing over 1,200 rounds in a single 24-hour period, halting multiple assaults. A map annotated by U.S. intelligence marks the kill zones where attackers were annihilated en masse. Faced with this relentless barrage, Japanese officers debated abandoning banzai tactics altogether. How close did this shift bring the Japanese to abandoning their most iconic form of attack? Did the mortars alone break the spirit of the banzai, or were other factors at play? By mid-1944, the 81mm mortar had become a symbol of lethal efficiency against banzai attacks. Its modest shells, once mocked, now tore through human waves with relentless precision. Japanese soldiers' laughter had turned to dread. American infantrymen came to rely on the steady staccato of mortar fire as a shield against death. Yet, buried in the aftermath reports and fragmented intercepts, questions linger. Was the initial Japanese dismissal a tragic underestimation or a reflection of a deeper cultural clash in warfare? What might have happened had that laughter never turned to fear? Each episode is a document I pull from the dust of the archives. Share your own stories. Many of you have relatives who lived through that time, and your words help connect personal memory with archival evidence. Stay curious. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode tomorrow. In the shadowed corners of a war room in late 1943, a Japanese squadron commander's report lies folded, its edges frayed and stained with sweat. Within its cramped characters, the phrase recurs, "American mortars. Persistent, precise, unexpected." For months, these documents remained buried beneath layers of official indifference. The commander had observed firsthand the mortar's pattern, a staccato rhythm of explosions that disrupted formations and shattered morale. Yet the higher echelons turned a blind eye, clinging instead to the comfort of their artillery dominance. A faded map, annotated in hurried pencil, reveals the sectors hardest hit by mortar fire, places where banzai charges faltered or dissolved entirely. How could the Japanese command fail to heed such warnings? Were they blinded by doctrine or by a willful denial of an emerging threat? Meanwhile, in the American, camps scattered across the Pacific Islands, mortar crews rehearsed their deadly choreography. The 81mm mortar, though simple, demanded precision and coordination under fire. A U.S. Navy pilot's logbook, recovered years later, mentions observing columns of enemy falling back under unseen barrage. The pilot's sketches, crude yet detailed, depict the silhouette of the mortar tube nestled among palms, firing shells that burst like thunderclaps. The auditory landscape, sharp crack, muted thud, then the stifled screams of the charge, became a grim soundtrack of the island battles. Yet, behind these sounds lurked an unsettling question. How many lives were lost before the mortar's true potential was realized? What hidden cost did this silent killer exact on both sides? Deep within the Mitsubishi engineering archives, a series of prototype notes on Japanese mortar designs from 1938 to 1942 reveal a curious hesitation. Despite developing larger calibers, little effort was invested in countering the 81mm model specifically. A technical drawing shows a short-barreled mortar variant abandoned mid-design, its specifications marked insufficient impact. Was this oversight a failure of imagination or a strategic gamble that underestimated the enemy's adaptability? A torn page from a field manual hints at internal debates over resource allocation. Should more be invested in heavy artillery or mobile mortars? The answer, obscured by wartime secrecy, suggests a deeper rift in Japanese military thinking. Could this internal conflict have sealed the fate of countless Banzai attackers? In the chaos of the Battle of Tarawa, the first clear test of the 81mm mortar's lethal promise unfolded. As Japanese forces launched desperate Banzai waves, the mortar platoon's rapid-fire patterns created lethal kill zones. A hastily sketched battlefield diagram, found decades later in a Marine officer's journal, shows clusters of craters marking the graveyards of charging soldiers. Yet, American after-action reports reveal a paradox. Initial mortar rounds were often off-target, their crews inexperienced and under fire. It was only through brutal trial and error that the mortar became an efficient tool of slaughter. How did this brutal learning curve shape the strategies on both sides? Was the price paid in human life too high to ignore? Japanese countermeasures evolved in the wake of devastating losses. Captured documents instruct troops to avoid massed charges, favoring stealth and dispersed movements. A weathered pamphlet found near Saipan advises, "Do not advance without cover." Mortars see all yet. The cultural weight of the Banzai charge was immense, a ritualistic, almost sacred act of defiance. Despite tactical advice, many units continued these charges with grim determination. A rare photograph captures a moment just before an assault. A group of soldiers poised, faces set in grim resolve, oblivious to the impending mortar fire. Why did tradition prevail over tactical reason? Was there a fatal stubbornness embedded in the doctrine that doomed these men? By early 1944, the mortar's shadow stretched across the Pacific theater. The Battle of Saipan crystallized its deadly role. Mortar teams fired thousands of rounds, halting repeated Banzai waves with devastating efficiency. A U.S. intelligence map, annotated with coordinates and impact data, reveals how mortar fire shaped the battlefield's geography, carving lethal corridors through the charging ranks. Internal memos from Japanese commanders express growing despair, debating whether to abandon the Banzai tactic entirely. But the final decision lingered, suspended between honor and survival. Did the relentless mortar fire break more than just bodies? Did it erode the very spirit that fueled the charge? The 81mm mortar emerged from the shadows of skepticism to become a symbol of lethal precision against one of the Pacific War's most iconic tactics. The laughter that once greeted, its shells turned to silence, a silence that echoed across blood-soaked beaches and shattered lines. Yet beneath the surface of victory lay questions unanswered. Could a different response have altered the course of these battles? What secrets remain buried in the fragments of intercepted messages and faded photographs? The story of the 81mm mortar is not just one of metal and fire. It is a chronicle of assumptions shattered and the brutal realities of war. In the aftermath of Saipan, a cryptic message intercepted by Allied codebreakers from a Japanese regimental headquarters mentioned the cursed tubes with a tone of bitterness seldom recorded. The phrase 81mm mortars was accompanied by a rare admission. They cut down our men like reeds before the storm. The radio message then abruptly ended, replaced by static and unintelligible fragments. This broken intercept, stored in a dusty archive for decades, underscores the profound shock the Japanese forces experienced. How did such a modest weapon inspire such dread in an army famed for its resilience and discipline? Was this an acknowledgement of a new kind of warfare that rendered traditional valor obsolete? Across the Pacific, American mortar crews refined their tactics to exploit the enemy's vulnerabilities. Training manuals from mid-1944 emphasize rapid target acquisition and coordinated fire missions, often involving multiple mortar teams saturating likely avenues of attack. Photographs from these training sessions reveal young soldiers crouched beside their weapons, faces hardened by anticipation, hands stained with grease and dirt. The smell of cordite and burning powder hung heavy in the humid air. Yet these men knew that behind every round fired lay the shattered bodies of charging soldiers and the fragile line between survival and annihilation. How did the psychological burden of wielding such a weapon affect these crews? Was their detachment a necessity or a haunting burden? Japanese tactical adaptations grew more desperate as the war dragged on. Captured directives from late 1944 demonstrate a shift towards nighttime infiltration and guerrilla-style ambushes, intended to circumvent the deadly mortar fire that awaited any open assault. A torn field notebook, recovered from a fallen officer, contains hastily drawn sketches of mortar positions with notes on likely blind spots. Yet, the persistence of banzai charges, even in diminished numbers, reflects an enduring ethos of sacrifice and honor. A faded battlefield photograph shows a lone soldier charging, bayonet raised, his figure silhouetted against a sky lit by mortar flares. What drove these men to face near certain death despite overwhelming evidence? Was it blind obedience, desperation, or something deeper rooted in culture and identity? The cumulative toll of the 81mm mortar's deadly efficiency became evident in Japanese casualty records and battle reports. An internal audit from mid-1944 cites hundreds of instances where massed infantry assaults were decimated before closing with American lines. Yet, the official records rarely mention the mortar by name, instead attributing losses to artillery and machine gun fire in a deliberate obfuscation. Why did Japanese military bureaucracy obscure the role of this weapon? Was it an attempt to preserve morale, or a reflection of the denial that had plagued their command since the first deadly encounters? The hidden narratives within these documents suggest a fracture between reality and perception. In the island's dense jungles and rocky ridges, the 81mm mortar crews became ghosts, unseen but ever present. A Marine squad leader's journal entry from late 1944 describes the eerie soundscape. The sharp whistle of mortar rounds overhead, then the dull thuds as they struck. Invisible killers that turned the night into a deadly minefield. The psychological warfare wrought by these weapons extended beyond physical destruction. It sowed fear and hesitation. Yet, the exact locations of many mortar positions remain unrecorded, lost in the chaos of retreat and advance. How many lives were spared or lost because of this unseen menace? What secrets do the silent battlefields still hold? By late 1944, as the war's tide shifted inexorably, the 81mm mortar had transcended its initial underestimation. Its shells carved deadly arcs through the air, rewriting the narrative of banzai charges and mass infantry assaults. Yet beneath the tactical, success lay a haunting question. Had the very nature of warfare changed? Was the brutal efficiency of indirect fire a harbinger of mechanized, impersonal slaughter? And in the silent aftermath, what did the ghosts of those shattered charges whisper to those who survived? In the waning months of 1944, intelligence reports reveal an unsettling shift in Japanese operational doctrine. The revered banzai charges, once emblematic of unwavering resolve, were now increasingly seen as liabilities. Classified memorandum from a Japanese divisional staff officer, smuggled out and later declassified, states bluntly, "The 81mm mortars have rendered massed assaults obsolete. Survival demands adaptation or extinction." Yet, despite this stark assessment, the cultural weight of honor-bound sacrifice persisted. A rare color photograph, taken by a war correspondent embedded with American forces, captures the aftermath of a failed banzai charge. Bodies strewn across a cratered field, mortar casings gleaming amid the carnage. How did the clash between tradition and survival shape the final desperate acts of a fading empire? Was the mortar merely a weapon or a catalyst that shattered an entire ethos? American commanders, aware of the mortar's pivotal role, poured resources into expanding its deployment. Production records from the Springfield Armory show a marked increase in 81mm mortar manufacture throughout 1944, with units trained specifically to counter banzai tactics. A weathered training film, recently restored, depicts mortar crews coordinating with infantry to create overlapping fields of fire, turning natural terrain into deadly kill zones. The sound design of the film, sharp cracks followed by muffled explosions, immerses the viewer in the tension of those brutal island battles. Yet, the footage also raises an unspoken question. How many lives were irrevocably altered by these cold calculations? What moral weight did commanders bear in orchestrating such systematic destruction? As the Pacific Campaign drew closer to its bloody conclusion, the legacy of the 81mm mortar was etched into countless battlefield graves. Veterans' memoirs speak of the weapon with a mixture of respect and solemnity, acknowledging its role in halting the seemingly unstoppable banzai tide. Yet, hidden within these recollections are fragments of doubt and sorrow. A letter from a U.S. infantryman, penned months after the war, reflects on the paradox. We feared the charge, but hated the cost of stopping it. In the quiet aftermath, the mortar's roar faded, but the silence it left behind remained heavy with unanswered questions. What stories of courage and tragedy lie buried beneath those shattered waves? How did this small weapon redefine the brutal calculus of human will and machine inevitability?